Welcome back, Danny. Last episode, we talked about Woodford Reserve. I thought that was really awesome. This week, you're bringing in Basil Hayden Bourbon. I'm excited to hear and learn about this and taste it when we finally can get to it. So tell me a little bit about Basil Hayden.
Yeah, Basil Hayden is a really interesting bourbon. It's definitely like a foundational bourbon to the whole industry. Everyone's heard of it. Most people that are into bourbon have tried it, and a lot of people keep it in their home, even though it is little bit of a beginner bourbon. And we'll get into that a little bit later, why I say it's a beginner bourbon.
Okay.
I mean, you can drink whatever bourbon you want. No, there's no wrong answers in bourbon. So Basil Hayden's a really cool one. It's one of 4 Kentucky straight bourbons in the Beam small batch collection. Those other 3 would be Booker's, Baker's, and Knob Creek. And they basically are taking the same or very similar bourbons and spitting them out at different proofs and ages. So it's really interesting when you can kind of pick through, like you have a Basil Hayden's, a Knob Creek, and a Booker's, and a Baker's, and drink them next to each other to compare those ages and different proofs they're pulling them at. The Basil Hayden's is the lowest proof in that whole collection, so it's definitely the easier one to get into the Beam products that way. And that's why I kind of say it's a little bit of a beginner bourbon, but I think most people like to keep a bottle around. Like I said, it's a very classic foundational bourbon. Basil Hayden's is actually named after Basil Hayden Sr., who is not on this bottle, but you can find his picture on the old Granddad bottles.
Oh,
so that was something I
interesting.
learned doing some research for this video. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Like I said, it's a great, affordable starter bourbon. It's really easy drinking and friendly. It's only 80 proof, so some of those, as I've drank bourbon, I've gotten a little bit more into higher proof stuff. With higher proof tends to be more flavor, a little more complexity. And at 80 proof, this is 10 proof lower than the Woodford Reserve we were drinking last video. So it is a little bit more, less nuanced in my opinion.
It's just that bourbon and cola.
You do see a few bourbon and colas with the Basil Hayden's, yeah. I still wouldn't. I think for me, it's a really good one straight because of that lower proof. You don't really need ice or any water, nice. Which is a nice way to enjoy it. And I mean, that does not say that you can't add ice or water. Again, that's just my take on it. So we can start getting into some smelling and some drinking if you want.
Let's do it.
We'll go ahead and take your sniff. This is a interesting one because I actually really didn't like it the first time I had it. It took me a couple tries having it, and it's surprised me because of the low proof. How much it opens up after sitting for a while. So I kind of thought maybe I would pour it on the video today just because you could get that fresh smell and as it sits a little longer. But I've had this one open for a while, but usually what I get on a first impression is like bread dough, and then that really quickly turns into butterscotch, and you get a lot of like alcohol burn off of this, which is again kind of strange because it's that lower proof. But then it's a high rye bourbon, so that rye content in the bourbon is higher than most. So you get a lot of spicy pepper out of there, which is typical with a high rye bourbon. Also get a little vanilla and honeysuckle, and a little bit of like leather spice out of there too. What are you getting on the palate?
Well, I can tell you that not being the level of bourbon drinker that you are, I can see where this would be somewhat of an entry level sipper for someone. I do get that bread dough right away. The honeysuckle I'm not quite picking up, but that's, all palates are different. I definitely can get that vanilla, especially in the nose. Yeah, this is nice.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun doing this with a wide range of people. Like you don't drink much bourbon. I drink a little bit of bourbon. I've got friends who drink a lot of bourbon because everyone picks up something different out of there, on the palate and on the nose, which just makes this sort of stuff a lot more fun. So did you have a taste?
I did.
What'd you think?
Enjoyed it. I like it. And that's what I meant when I said that I can see why this is kind of a nice entry level. Although there is that heat on the tongue that is surprising at 80 proof. I can definitely see this. I'll take some heat online. I would throw this in a big glass of ice with a Diet Pepsi. I'm joking.
Well, you wouldn't catch any flack from me. I mean, you buy a bottle of bourbon, you enjoy it how you want. If someone wants to buy Blanton's and throw it in their Coke, I'm not going to complain.
Let us know how you feel about that in the comments.
Yeah.
Drop something down below.
Yeah, so my impression, Basil Hayden's isn't one of my die-hard favorites
Sure.
like Woodford was, but I thought it'd be interesting to go from one big foundational bourbon to another in our first couple videos. I tend to take it on the palate. It's a little thin, a lot thinner than Woodford, and you get a little more of that pepper with the high rye. I'm not a huge fan of the high rye bourbons. That's today. Who knows in a couple months?
Sure.
I mean, I've been working here for a few months, and my taste has changed.
Almost a year.
Yeah, almost a year, and it's changed quite a bit since then. So that's why another reason I find bourbon really interesting is because you're constantly developing a different palate, which is fun. So like I said, it starts off a little thin and peppery for me. It turns into a little like honey and like dried fruit towards the end. And it kind of gets like a creamy taste. Now it doesn't like, I don't get like a creamy texture, but it's like, it's hard to describe.
Well,
yeah.
I can completely get that. So there's a creaminess in the mouthfeel that as it lingers, I can feel it there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get that.
So like I was trying to take notes before this and like, what am I going to say about this bourbon? And in my head, it kept coming up as like thin, but also creamy. And I was trying to wrap my head around that. And I still don't know what that is exactly.
So why do you think this bourbon is such a good seller? And in particular, I noticed that bourbon drinkers tend to lean this way on occasion, more so than I think any other. Is this more of a crowd pleaser? Like if I take a certain bottle of wine to a dinner, I know that the majority of the people are going to enjoy it. Mm-hmm. Is this one of those bourbons?
I think Basil Hayden's is easy to find. You can pretty much find it everywhere, and it is a crowd pleaser. And at that lower proof, it's not hitting you in the head like some of the higher, tougher proofs are. You can pretty much open this around most people who have a vague interest in bourbon or whiskey, and they'll find something that they like in it. And as it sits, I mean, this is one that you kind of open up with a bunch of friends and you're talking, hanging out, and the longer it sits, the more I enjoy it. And I think that's one thing I had to learn about bourbon in general. Some of them you really just got to let sit open for quite a while.
Yeah.
Just like this. I mean, we haven't been drinking too much, but if we were hanging out and drinking at this rate, by the end of this glass and into the next one, I'd really enjoy it. I've read a couple comments from other people reviewing Basil Hayden's that it really rewards a second glass. Whereas like Woodford, especially the Woodford double oaked, like that's very rewarding right away. You're getting all those.
So
really
I'm making
flavors.
lists as we do this, and right now the double oak is, for this podcast, number one. so something's got to take double oak off of that.
Oh,
so
we got a couple that I can bring in. Yeah. Yeah, I've been telling you about them. The finish on this one is, that's probably my favorite part of it. I mean, there's usually nose palate finish. It finishes really nice. I tend to get a little nutty out of it. Nutty and oaky, which are two tasting notes I tend to really like in bourbon. And then you get that dried fruit. And the way it like lingers in your mouth is a lot more pleasant compared to some other bourbons where you're wanting to keep drinking it because the finish isn't that nice. And this one is, and I think that's why this one is it's a good one to let air out and breathe, because the finish is so easy to just sit on for a little bit. You're not wanting to have more.
Yeah, it's gorgeous in the glass too.
Yeah. It's a good looking bourbon. They just upped their labels. So we've got a pint here that I'm working on. This is their old label. And that's a really classic, good looking label. I think a lot of people that start in bourbon, another reason they go for Basil Hayden's is just how nice the label is. They did just update their label. So this is the 5th we've got right now. And I actually really like that a lot.
I like the update. For those that are just listening to the podcast and not watching it on YouTube, the original labeling is a paper labeling that goes over the shoulder of the bottle and almost looks like a shirt with the classic Basil Hayden belt buckle around it. The new one is a paper label with the belt buckle wrapped around it. It's sharp looking.
Yeah,
and a new
it just
cork
looks cleaner.
Too. Yeah.
And
Much
I mean,
cleaner.
selfishly stocking shelves.
Yeah.
These little paper shirts, I mean, they look good, especially when they're really nice, but in delivery they can get messed up, and if they get ripped, they just don't really look the same. But they're one of the bourbons that also has a nice tall bottle. It's almost like a wine bottle, so there's like an elegance to it too, which is again, beginner bourbon in my eyes. So it's like an easy one to go to. It looks good, and not many people would turn this down as a gift, whether they're just starting into bourbon or been in for years.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I forgot my cocktail this week.
Oh, because that was on my mental notes was, is there a cocktail you want to make?
It's a blackberry bramble, but I didn't write down the recipe. But I will do another video for that.
That's
I enjoyed
fantastic.
making the Woodford one. I don't know how many people watch that or are going to try and make it. That drink was really good.
It looked good. It looked really
Woodford
good.
Spire. But
Yeah.
yeah, it'll be a blackberry bramble to go with the
Very
Basil
nice.
Hayden's. And I'm just finding all these on their websites because I like to go with what they recommend. I mean, I figure they're making the bourbon.
Yep.
So they're going to choose and create cocktails that kind of emphasize the good parts of their bourbon. So.
Well, let us know in the comments what you think about this podcast about Basil Hayden's, and if you have another bourbon you'd like us to take a stab at trying and explaining, or have Danny talk about on the show. Put it in the comments and let us know. Remember, subscribe. It helps us more than you know. This was awesome, Danny. I'm looking forward to next week.
Cheers.
Cheers.